Hey, it's Mike here, and today I want to take a quick look at this astounding map from a recent interactive graphic article from Bloomberg. Just came out a couple days ago, and it really makes me want to reevaluate our priorities in terms of land use in the United States. And what Bloomberg did was take USDA data on land use and break it down into what fraction was used for urban areas and what fraction is used for timber, etc. And the big elephant in the middle of the United States is livestock. Right off the bat, in terms of the lower 48 states, livestock they use up 41% of our total land. This is the United States of meat. In terms of the numbers, we are looking at 654 million acres dedicated to grazing animals, and then another 127 million dedicated to growing feed for them. That's primo land. And it is very obvious, but the way this chart is not representative of where these are, just the fraction of the total US that they take up. Now, 41% is a ridiculous proportion of our land. That's enough to be, oh my God, that's way too much. But I have actually looked at this data before, and it could be even higher. In terms of land that is particularly used for livestock purposes, they did not count the export feed, which goes to feed animals. Just that extra export feed is like roughly the size of Florida. And so my total was closer to like 47, 48% of our total land, and that's ridiculous. Now I want to talk about some of the other land uses just because they're really interesting, but first I want to put all of this into perspective by looking at it in terms of calories. If we average up the standard American diet, we're looking at only about 1/5 of calories coming from meat, and then if you add in dairy, it goes up to about 1/4 of total calories. So we're using about half our land for a much smaller fraction of the food we eat. Super inefficient. And just to get another source to back that from Pew Research, yes, it looks like about 400 to 600 calories from meat and dairy out of about 2,500 calories for the average person in the US. And honestly, I really thought that meat would be a higher portion of total calories for the average person, but apparently it's not. All right, now I want to look at some other land uses in the US just because they're pretty interesting. Looking at the main chart, you might think, hey, that's a lot of timberland too, but it's totally worth noting that that is all sequestering carbon and it's cleaning up the water, it's building soil, but then over to this chunk in the middle here, it's doing the opposite. It's degrading soil and it's releasing a lot of carbon. Now, in terms of this giant chunk of grazing, it's important to note that grass-fed beef emits more carbon from the actual cow than grain-fed beef does. It's more methane emissions. Another one which I thought was kind of funny that they put in there was this tiny little squares for Christmas trees, and then also this little mini cluster is from golfing, which is kind of crazy that's even that significant. And another land use that I find pretty disturbing here is down in the bottom right. That big chunk is just the top 100 largest land-owning families, and in the top right, we see all of our urban land, and it's pretty comparable in size, and so that is inequality right there, visualized. And final point about that, as the article mentions, just in the last decade, that private land mass has grown by about 50%, and that is huge. Now I quickly want to address a topic that always seems to come up when I mention land use and grazing, and that is people say, oh, well, all that grazing land isn't arable. It would have no other use if it weren't for grazing cattle and grazing other animals, and so we might as well do it. A lot of it just doesn't fall into the category of land that can be used for industrial corn and soy. You can't easily throw a bunch of machines on it. For example, look at this land, might not be considered arable, but they're growing a lot of food on it over there. And some of it might also be pretty dry land. Well, there are some crops that are not corn and soy that can be grown in some pretty arid climates. And looking to other projects around the world, like this one in China, it is possible to be greening these desert areas. And then you can grow all sorts of stuff.
According to our calculation, there are over 70 kinds of crops growing here. Many are not planted by us, but they just grow themselves.
Crops like corn, tomatoes, sorghum, and sunflowers, transforming more than 200 hectares of sand dunes into an oasis, all within 6 months.
All right, I think the last question worth asking is, how did this happen? I don't think any one person or group of people just decided, let's use almost half of our land for animal agriculture. No, I think it was a lot more of a result of market conditions and subsidies and mostly consumer demand. It happened from people wanting to buy a lot of meat. And finally, using that much land has some other really negative effects. For example, on water, all of these nutrients, which is 35 billion humans worth of solid waste from livestock in the US, according to this government paper, there. A lot of it goes down into the Gulf of Mexico. And right now we're seeing a massive wildlife die-off in the Gulf of Mexico. And this is just not good stuff. There are a lot of negative effects, and I talk about a lot of those in other videos. So go ahead and watch them. Also for fun, let me know down below what you would do with 40% of our land if you could do anything, or what we should be doing instead in the comments. All right, thanks so much for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.